Your flight arrived on time, and you spent 40 minutes longer getting there than you would have on the same route in 1996. Both of those things are true, and only one of them was an accident. Here is the rule that runs the entire system. In the United States, a flight counts as on time if it lands less than 15 minutes after its schedule, not 15 minutes after how long the flight actually takes. 15 minutes after a number the airline chose. So they chose a bigger number, on average about 20 extra minutes per flight, and on some routes close to an hour. Nothing about the airplane changed. The airplane was never the slow part. Start with the rule itself, because everything downstream is a rational response to it. The Department of Transportation publishes on-time performance for every major American carrier. It's the number that shows up in press releases, in advertising, in the rankings travelers actually read. And the threshold is a cliff, not a slope. Land 14 minutes late and you are on time fully and officially. Land 16 minutes late and you are a failure permanently in a federal statistic. And it works. In 2025, Delta was ranked the most punctual airline in the United States for the 5th consecutive year, with an on-time rate of 80.9% across more than 1.8 million flights. Alaska came second at 79.2. That's an impressive operational record, and it is also measured entirely against schedules the airlines wrote themselves. Now think like an airline executive looking at that number. There are exactly two ways to improve it. You can fix your operation, which means more spare aircraft, more standby crews, faster turnarounds, better maintenance, and hundreds of millions of dollars. Or you can change the published schedule, which takes an afternoon and a spreadsheet. One of those is capital. The other is typing, and the industry's defense is stronger than it first sounds. A Breeze Airways executive put it bluntly, if you didn't do that, nobody would ever be on time. He's right. Air travel is a network. A single delayed aircraft in the morning cascades through every flight it was supposed to operate for the rest of the day. Building in slack is how the system absorbs shocks instead of transmitting them. So padding isn't automatically dishonest. It's a buffer. The question is how big the buffer got, who benefits from it, and whether anybody told you. Which means we need evidence rather than annoyance. Where did the time actually go? The best answer comes from a study by Dennis Jang at Washington University in St. Louis, with Yuval Salant and John Van Meegum at Northwestern's Kellogg School. They took every American domestic flight from 1997 to 2017 that ran on routes served consistently by the same airline. 43 million flights, precisely 43,062,886. Over those 21 years, the posted flight duration, the number you see when you book, rose 8.1%. That's 3.4 million hours added to the American flight schedule, spread across the passengers sitting in those seats, about 341 million passenger hours. Now here's the finding that matters most, and it's the one you have to get right. The researchers were explicit. Planes are not flying slower than they used to. Actual time in the air was essentially flat. The aircraft didn't change, the schedule did, so they built a model to work out where the extra time came from, and it accounts for more than 99% of the variation across all 43 million of those posted durations. Their conclusion, more than 45% of the increase comes from airlines strategically padding schedules to achieve better on-time performance. Nearly half, not weather, not congestion, strategy. The rest is real. Taxi times grew, airports got busier, and that portion is honest. But close to half of the extra time you spend on an itinerary exists because a federal statistic rewards it. A separate analysis by the economics writer Maxwell Tabarrok, working from 30 years of Bureau of Transportation statistics data, puts the average padding at roughly 20 minutes, somewhere between 10 and 15% of the total block time an airline blocks out for a flight. The same analysis estimates the cost of that time to passengers at around $6 billion a year, and finds that delays of 3 hours or more are about 4 times more common now than they were in 1990. Read those two findings together because they're the whole story. The published schedule became more reliable. The actual experience got worse. Both statements are true, and neither is a lie, which produces the line that should stay with you. The schedule got better while the trip got worse, and both of those were measured correctly. So which airline does this to you most? An analysis by FinanceBuzz ranked American carriers by what share of their scheduled time is padding. Southwest came out on top at 13.9%, then Alaska at 11.3%, United 10.2%, American 9.7%, Delta 9.4%, JetBlue 8.6%, Spirit 8.1%, Frontier 6.8%, Allegiant 6.4%, Hawaiian 4.7%. Now let me undercut my own chart because that ranking is misleading and you deserve to know why. Southwest is top of that list mostly because its flights are short. Padding, measured as a percentage, punishes short routes automatically. Measured in actual minutes, Southwest pads about 11, which is less than Alaska and United at around 13. Southwest isn't the worst offender, it's the shortest average flight. That's the honest version. If a chart makes an airline look bad because of arithmetic rather than behavior, the chart is the problem. What isn't ambiguous is the direction. Average padding across the industry went from roughly 8 minutes in 2012 to about 11 minutes a decade later, and you can watch it happen on a single route. Aviation data firm OAG examined more than 1,400 scheduled flights between Los Angeles and San Francisco in 1996. And not one of them was scheduled to take longer than 90 minutes. By 2015, almost half of the flights on that same short hop were blocked out at 90 to 110 minutes. Nothing about the distance between Los Angeles and San Francisco changed in those 19 years. So if it's about weather and congestion, here's the question that breaks that explanation. Why does the same airline flying the same aircraft type pad two different routes by different amounts? Because the Kellogg researchers tested exactly that, and this is the finding almost nobody has repeated. They looked at what happened when the competitive landscape on a route changed. When a competitor entered, published times tended to come down. When competition on a route thinned out, strategic padding went up. Their own phrasing, decreased airline competition on a route, is associated with increased strategic padding. Sit with what that means. Weather doesn't know how many airlines serve a city pair. Air traffic control doesn't consult the market share table. If padding were purely operational, competition would be irrelevant to it. It isn't irrelevant. Which means the number printed on your ticket is partly a competitive signal. Where somebody is watching, the schedule tightens. Where nobody is, it grows. And that reframes the whole thing. Padding isn't only insurance against delay, it's also a thing airlines can afford to do when you have nowhere else to go. But if the flight itself is basically honest, why does the whole trip feel so much longer than it used to? Because the flight is the only part that didn't grow. Break a journey into its real segments: parking, security, waiting at the gate, boarding, taxi out, time in the air, taxi in, baggage. 8 bars on a chart, 7 of them got longer. One of them, the air, stayed roughly where it was. Walk the bars one at a time and you can see where your afternoon went. Parking moved further out as airports expanded, so there's a shuttle bus at the front of the trip that didn't used to exist. Security became a queue you cannot predict, which means you don't budget the average wait, you budget the worst one. The gate wait grew because you arrived early to survive that queue. Boarding stretched as carry-on volume rose. Taxi times lengthened as airports filled with more aircraft than their taxiways were laid out for. And baggage delivery at the far end has not improved in decades. Every one of those is a separate organization making a separate decision, and not one of them is the airline lengthening your flight. 2001 is when the pre-flight tax was created, and it never went away. The security architecture built after that year added a fixed cost to the front of every single trip, measured not in minutes of flying, but in hours of arriving early because you daren't risk it. Boarding got slower too, and that one is self-inflicted. Bag fees pushed carry-ons into the cabin, and the aircraft now loads through a single door with everyone fighting for bin space. So, compare two versions of the same journey. In one, you arrive 30 minutes before departure, walk on, and you're out with your bag 15 minutes after landing. In the other, you allow 2 hours for security, wait half an hour at the belt, and take a bus from a remote car park. Same route, same distance, same aircraft more or less. In 20 years, a 2-hour 20-minute trip became 3 hours 10, and the meal that used to be included became a €20 sandwich. The flying didn't get slower. Everything wrapped around the flying got fatter. Now, some objections because if you fly a lot, you have already thought of several. Isn't this just fuel? Airlines slowed down to save money, not for the schedule. Padding costs airlines money rather than saving it. Crews are paid on block time, so a longer scheduled flight raises the wage bill, and blocking out more time per flight lowers how many flights each aircraft can fly in a day. If this were a cost-cutting scheme, it would be a bad one. Isn't it the engines? Partly true, and worth separating out. Modern high-bypass turbofans are designed around a slightly lower cruise Mach. Fan tip speed is a hard physical limit, and the efficient window for an airliner sits roughly between Mach 0.76 and 0.83, with drag rising sharply past about Mach 0.89. Real engineering, it has nothing to do with why your schedule grew. Isn't it congestion? Yes, and that's the honest half of the 8.1%. Holding patterns, runway queues, taxi bottlenecks at Kennedy and O'Hare in Los Angeles, and controller staffing shortfalls. Nobody is disputing that half. The argument is about the other half. What about the jet stream? Real, and it explains why your eastbound flight is quicker than your westbound one. It doesn't explain why the same route in the same direction is scheduled longer than it was 20 years ago. And the one somebody always says, it's the seatback screens. The entertainment system is drawing all that extra power. Engines produce megawatts. Seats consume watts. It isn't the screens. One more thing about how this plays out on any given day. Once an airline loses its schedule integrity, usually somewhere in the early afternoon, it generally doesn't claw the time back before the network resets at midnight. If your flight is after about 1 in the afternoon, you're flying inside whatever went wrong that morning. So can you beat any of this? Partly. And only if you understand what you're buying. Fly the smaller airport when you have the option. Security is minutes rather than hours. Boarding through stairs and 2 doors is genuinely faster, and the walk to your bag is short. You will lose time on the ground at a big hub that no schedule change can give back. Fly the competitive route. If padding grows where competition thins, then a city pair with 3 airlines fighting over it is being scheduled more honestly than one with a single carrier. That's not a guarantee. It's a tendency, and it's measurable. And fly eastbound when the choice is yours, because the wind is the one part of this that was never negotiable. And there's a consequence of all this you've noticed without naming it. Flights now routinely arrive early, not occasionally, but as a designed outcome, because a schedule padded enough to survive a bad day will finish ahead of itself on a good one. That early arrival isn't a gift. It's the buffer you already paid for, handed back at the destination instead of taken off the schedule at the start. Here's the thing I keep coming back to. Nobody in this story broke a rule. The Department of Transportation defined on time. Airlines optimized for the definition, exactly as any organization optimizes for whatever it is graded on. The metric worked perfectly, and the passenger paid for it in hours. So I'll leave the argument open because I don't think it's settled. Is schedule padding a quiet fraud, or is it simple prudence in a network that would otherwise collapse into daily chaos? Both cases are real, and the comments are the right place for that fight. 2 asks while you're there. Tell me your route and the gap between what the schedule says and what the flight actually takes. And if you work in this industry, a pilot, a dispatcher, a crew scheduler, tell us what this looks like from inside, because you know things the data doesn't show. One last thing, and it's brand new. In June of this year, NASA's X-59 broke the sound barrier for the first time, reaching about Mach 1.1 at 43,000 feet. Weeks later, the Federal Aviation Administration proposed repealing the 1973 ban on civil supersonic flight over the United States, replacing a speed limit with a noise limit, sonic boom overpressure at the ground not exceeding 0.11 of a pound per square foot. Concorde produced roughly 2 pounds. The comment period on that proposal closes in 3 days. Speed is coming back to aviation. The schedule is not going to hand it to you.